Everyone, thanks so much for joining us. I'm James Hadley, Executive Director of MTN, and I'm joined by Thomas Hescott of Stage Directors UK, who will introduce himself very shortly. Thank you so much to all the members of SDUK and MTN and anyone else who's joining us today for our lovely discussion about directing musical theatre. We'll be talking to our four panelists very shortly, and they'll introduce themselves. And just before we do, just a reminder that we'll be inviting everyone to come and join us to see Beam on the 10th of September soon. So do check your inboxes for that. As a director or someone who aspires to direct musical theatre in the future, it would be a fantastic opportunity to see a lot of new musicals in development that are looking for directors, most of them. So if you're looking to get more involved in new musical theatre, Beam is definitely a place to have on your calendar, diary, whatever you use these days. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Thomas to introduce himself.
Hi there. Yes, thanks very much. I'm Thomas Hescott. I am one of the people who run Stage Directors UK. We're a professional association for theatre directors and opera directors in the UK. We represent your interests and also campaign for better rights and working conditions alongside unions and other associations. And alongside that, we provide a community for our members with events, mentoring, career development opportunities, that kind of thing. And we represent directors across the sort of across your career, whether you're emerging, mid-career, established, whether you're working in the commercial or subsidised sector. If you identify as a director, then we're the community that represents you. We can help with contracts, we can help with best practice, anything like that. And you can find out more about us at our website, stagedirectorsuk.com. So that's me. And I think our panelists are going to introduce themselves now. And the first panelist on my right is Omar.
Hello, lovely people. My name is Omar Okai. I am obviously director and choreographer, but I'm also co-founder of the and co-director of the Black British Theatre Awards, now in our third year. I'm also co-director, co-founder of the Black Theatre and Film Global Directory as well. And I've been running, I work for a company, my own company as well, with a guy called Simon Collier, called Okai Collier Theatre Company. For like nearly 30 years now, that's how old I am. Nearly 30 years now. And presently, I am resident director on a fantastic new show, which is, we start rehearsal in June and it tours in August. And it comes into town, which will be next spring, and it's called Bedknobs and Broomsticks, with two fabulous directors and a fabulous team and a great diverse cast. Diverse in many ways, genders, colour, everything. It's really beautiful. And that's me in a nutshell, really. And my big thing, I suppose, in myself is I'm very much into the diverse look at casting and the diverse look at creatives in theatre. And that's one of the reasons why I became a director choreographer, because I didn't see enough of it. And I said, well, it's no use moaning about it, but I get myself out there and fight to get into those places. So hence we do the Black British Theatre Awards with my co-founder, Solange Erdang, who's CEO of the Erdang Academy. And that's me, really. And I'm 55.
Thank you, Omar. Should we hand over to Bronagh? Do you want to go next?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, James, for having me. Yeah, I'm a theatre director. I've been directing for about 8 years, plays and musicals. I came first from a play background, but in the last 6 years, I've mainly been doing musicals. That said, last night we opened a new play on the West End, Duchess, Cruise. Excuse my tired voice. Yeah, we opened that last night, one-man show with a live gig element to it. So we have like a live DJ mixing and composer, which is really exciting, and music's very important in that play. And before that, I've done a lot on the off West End fringe stuff. Directed Little Women and Promises, and Broken Wings and Kaltoum. So I work quite a bit on new musicals, and that's yeah, that's my passion really. I love meeting new writers and being at the start of a project, and it's almost so excited about working on Cruise at the minute, being the first play to open reopen the West End. So yeah, that's me at the minute. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bronagh. Should we hand over to Tinuke, please?
Sure. Hi, my name's Tinuke, and I'm a theatre director as well. I've been directing, it'll be 10 years this year since I started directing things, or since I started assistant directing things is more accurate. And I have mostly worked with plays. I'd consider myself very much a musical theatre novice in terms of where I'm at in terms of directing, but it's something that I always wanted to do and kind of hoped I would get into. In the last couple of years that started to happen for me. The first musical I directed was in 2019. It was a production of The Colour Purple up at Leicester Curve, which we also then redid for a kind of digital version at the beginning of this year. So that was really interesting because I had it was my second time working in a musical, my first time working with cameras, so why not, let's just chuck me in and see what happens. But I've also in the meantime since then directed a panto, so I guess that has a lot of the same kind of structure of directing a musical in terms of who's there and how it functions. And I hope to sort of continue working in musical theatre in the future alongside plays. I'm hoping that I can be one of those people that does both, but we shall see. I got to workshop a musical this year of The Danish Girl, which is really exciting, up with Salador, and next year I'll be working at the Old Vic for most of the year as their bailiff director, which is the sort of associate position there. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, so mostly plays and hopefully more musicals. That's me, really.
Thank you so much, Tinuke. And then finally, but not least, over to Pravesh.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pravesh Kumar. I run my own theatre company called Rifco Theatre Company. We are now 21 years old. I started the company when I was 12. I suppose I started the company by accident. I just wanted to make work that was authentic and relevant to people that look like me. Because when I started my early career as an actor, and very often I would look out into the sea of white audiences, and I wanted to change that, I suppose, not knowing I wanted to change it. And the best way to do that is to make authentic work. So I spent 21 years doing that, and you know, it's been brilliant. We've been able to make some really kind of really diverse musicals. And that's what I really enjoy doing. Musicals like Britain's Got Bhangra, Laila the Musical, really using kind of music and fusing it, different styles of musicals together. So Rifco, my company, we develop musicals, we produce them, and then we tour them as well. So it's quite a big old job. And we also run a development scheme called Rifco Associates, which is all about new voices, that horrible word, emerging, which apparently I'm still emerging. We're developing 3 new musicals at the moment, which is really, really exciting, from 3 British South Asian writers, which is, you know, and the beauty of that is the kind of musicals that we're making, you're probably never gonna would never have got made if it wasn't a company like ours. I'm also developing a new musical for the main stage. It's called Frankie Goes to Bollywood. We've been developing that for nearly 2 years now, and we're hoping that it will be ready to be produced in 22-23. And it's based on the real events of many British young women that have been imported into the big machine that is Bollywood. What I love doing is really telling authentic stories. And that's what I've spent 21 years doing, and that's what I love doing. And I absolutely love making new musicals. It's just incredible. It's so tiring. You come out the other end of it going, oh my God, am I still alive? But when you hear that first chord of the music on stage, it's just brilliant. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pravesh. Thank you, all of our panelists. We're really delighted with such a brilliant range of relevant experiences today. So without further ado, we want to use this time really well. I mean, the first question really is one of those overarching questions for this discussion, which is, how different is directing a musical compared to directing a play with no songs in it? If you were talking to someone who came to you and said, look, I want some advice, I've been directing for a few years now, but I've only directed plays, and I've got the opportunity to direct a musical, and I'm thinking, you know, how differently should I approach this? What's different about the way I prepare for rehearsals and for the different kinds of collaborations I'm going to have? What would be your sort of top tips to someone who was approaching directing a musical for the first time in terms of how they might prepare for that experience? Who wants to go first? Omar, brilliant.
I would give it, I direct plays and musical also, but the main difference is, sorry, you have to be prepared to collaborate. There's a lot that the collaboration there of creatives is much, you've got your director, you have your choreographer, you have your obviously your set designers, then you have your musical team. The whole team is 10 times bigger, and everybody has to be given their space to create. And you can make a mistake sometimes as a director, think I've got to do all this on my own and I have to control everything. And then when you control everything, the sad thing is you can literally lose out on the most amazing gems. The turn of the song, the way they might help a writer to change the script by how the song is sang, so many things. That's the main thing I found when I first began. I started with musicals, the Okai Collier Company, but then I began approaching plays, and I realized that when I was directing a play, it was really, really focused with me on one thing. With the musicals, which I love as well, you have to literally give out that energy and give every single person on your team that chance to shine, because you can't make a good cake if you won't have butter in it, you won't have cheese, and you won't have this cheese, you won't have cream. Everyone puts stuff into the cake to make it work. And that's what I found is the difference. You've got to be prepared to sometimes drop your ego and allow other people to be part of that plan. You haven't got to control the whole thing of a musical. It's collaboration, true collaboration, and it's not easy. You may come into a rehearsal room with this amazing vision of what you want, but then everyone's got this vision of what they want things to sound like, look like, how they're written, how they're performed, how they dance, and you've got to put all that together as a director. That's the difference. I think that's the difference. It's good. It's a good difference as well. It's fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who else wants to respond to that one? Tinuke, yeah.
I can.
Please.
It's good. Yeah, I suppose I agree, and I think it often really depends on the kind of director you are as to whether or not that feels like a new thing. I would add to that actually that's probably advice that you'd want on a play as well. That actually the best work is going to come when you realise that your job is to control the situation, but rather to, have I frozen? Did I freeze? No, I didn't freeze. Or did I? Who can say? Like your job isn't ever actually to control everything, is it? It's often, your job is often to facilitate a room in which everyone is in the best you want to play people in position. That's all you're ever really doing, isn't it? You're sort of like giving everyone as many tools as you possibly can in order for them to make the best work they possibly can so that the show's good. And that's probably true all the time, I think, but it becomes especially true in musical theatre, partly just in the very limited experience that I have, partly just because there's just literally more people. Do you know what I mean? There's sort of just like a very practical thing, which is you just got a lot more stats, but I completely agree with Omar about that. And I suppose also I would say that like that can be really nice, because I think one of the things that I was really shocked by was how often on Colour Purple, which is my only real example, but I was really surprised, really pleasantly surprised by how often you're not running the room, like how often you're sort of just sat there and somebody else is running the room, and the whole the whole first week and is the MD teaching all the songs, and you're just sort of there. And I suppose a bit of advice I would give is to kind of like enjoy that feeling rather than becoming frustrated by it, because I suppose I could just as easily have gone the other way and been like, oh my god, these songs are taking so long, when am I going to get to do you know what I mean? And actually it's really nice to be able to kind of sit with the material like that. It almost gives you another couple of days of R&D for your brain to sort of cook and simmer and have stuff sort of like kind of turning over in your head, and it gives you a bit of a chance to like look at your company and work out who they are without, you know what I mean, which is like I find really useful. But I suppose like also what's really nice about having that time when you're not running the room is it just gives you a little bit of space to be able to look at something a bit more objectively. And I think that could be I really liked that about the process, and I suppose it's something to embrace rather than something to feel like what you don't want, this is the advice bit I suppose, is what you don't want us to be sat there kind of being like, when's it my turn? And rather just really kind of like enjoy the bit where you don't have to run it. It's so nice because when you're doing a play, it's always you and it's exhausting. So yeah.
Thanks, Tinuke. Pravesh.
That was really, I completely hear you, Tinuke. That's, yeah, absolutely. With musicals, I suppose, for me, because I make new musicals, music is always the king. It's the most important thing, right from the top of it. And I suppose I sometimes write the book on new musicals, not always. So music is the kind of holy grail of a musical, I think, and that's how I approach it when I'm directing. And it's a multi-art form where people are going to talk, they're going to sing, and they're going to dance, and all of that together forms the narrative. And it's just bringing that together seamlessly, working, like Omar said, working with your creative team to bring that all together so it marries beautifully. That's our job, I suppose. It should feel like one voice, one song. That's how I approach it.
Thanks, Pravesh. Bronagh, anything?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everyone there. It's such a collaborative process. And similarly, I came from a play background, and then going into a room and working with, it's kind of like working with three directors, really. And you've got your own heads of departments. And I think you need to be, open to the ideas that everyone is storytellers, and they might have their camp that they want to be champion, but at the end of the day, it's about grabbing those people together and making sure you're in the common idea of how you want to tell the story. And I guess for preparing for it, I take the same approach to musicals as I do with plays, about research and character development, but that's what excites me about storytelling versus the text. So I would still do the same kind of prep for that, but I would do a lot more prep because I have more creatives in the room all the time prior to rehearsals. And like you were saying, you do have that week where there's music calls usually going on, and it's nice to have that chance to sit back and really like think and hear the music and let like pictures form. It's just lovely to be able to be in a room and have the prep time to imagine. But yeah, I think there's similarities and differences. And I have, like I said, I've gone into lots of musicals in the last 6 years because I've just loved the process so much. I love the collaboration. I love hearing the ideas of the choreographer and the musical director and the rest of the team that put it together. But yeah, collaboration is 100% the key. And I think that immediate collaboration all of the time is the main difference.
It's probably important to say as well, like, I don't think I would necessarily advise that one changes one's process particularly. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that I thought I had to sort of like learn how to direct musicals, and of course I did, and I do. But actually, the skills you've developed as a director already, if you're already directing as a theatre director, the way that you work in the room, the way that you structure your space, and the kind of techniques or exercises or whatever work you do, you kind of want to do that anyway. It's not that you throw all that stuff away when you start directing musicals, I don't think, if it's working, because you want to create a world that feels, one, authentic to you so you can do your job properly, and also presumably the tools you have in place are in place for a reason and they work. What I suppose you might find is that you have less time to do them in because there are other departments also working. So it's about finding a sort of streaming the work or achieve results you've always wanted to do anyway. I think rather than become a different person because it's a musical now.
It's a really good point. Before I hand over to Thomas to ask the next question of our wonderful panel, something I should have said at the start is that, of course, later in the discussion, we really love anyone watching to ask your questions as well. And the way you can do that is at any stage that you think of a question as you're listening to people speak, do just write a question in the chat where you're watching on YouTube. Just write question in capital letters at the start and then write your question into the chat. And we will receive those to pass on to the panelists in the second half of the discussion. So do write down a question now or whenever you think of one as you're listening if you want us to pass those questions on in the discussion. Over to Thomas.
Thank you. Actually, I think, Omar, did you want to come in with a point just before then? I noticed you raised your hand.
Just a really quick point. It's nothing really, well, it is important actually, because sometimes what happens is when you're doing musicals, sometimes producers can put teams together, and not always, but it has happened few times to me, where you don't really get to know your team. They have favorites they like to work with, and then they put you with this team. And that can be a very dangerous thing, because you can all be fantastic, but all being fantastic and at odds together is just a mess. So this is just being what it is. You've got to really make sure that the team you work with, that you really gonna get on, and bypass your egos and realize that the piece you're working on is the musical, and the star of the show is always going to be the musical. That's what I wanted to say. You've got to get on, take your egos out the door, and the star of the show has got to be the musical. The star of the show is the show, nobody else. You can star in it, because once that show's on stage, to be honest with you, the public aren't really interested who directing choreo. I mean, the general public. They don't care who choreographed or directed it. Maybe all I want to see is a good show. And if you've not done your job together as a team, it's not a good show.
I think that's so important and so brilliantly put. It's that you know, my very limited experience in musicals, that collaboration is so key, and it's fantastic to hear everyone say it, but also that collaboration isn't always easy and comfortable, and isn't always with people that you've known for 20 years before you start. I think it's and the politics of that and navigating that are kind of, I mean, they're so much part of a director's job anyway, but particularly when your team expands as much as it does between straight theatre and musical theatre. It's so good to hear about collaboration. Are there any skills, I suppose I'm thinking like being able to read music or anything like that, the skills that you think are a real advantage that either you have or you wish you had, or that are specific to musical theatre rather than straight theatre?
Is that to me or in general?
In general, but go for it first if you can.
Yeah, I sort of read music, not really well, but I do agree with Pravesh that the main thing to combat musicals is obviously the music. I think I would have loved to have, I got better, I would love to be able to read music. But then again, as a director, all I need to really know is to know that I like the music I'm working with, and I can hear it and I like it. I don't really need to read that music because that's someone else's job in the room. And that's their that's what they need to do. And they can sort of say, if I just say to them, oh, can they sing a bit higher? Or that's their job, it's not my job. Because otherwise, what we can start doing is, as directors, and we all know we can all start sometimes put our nose other places where it's not needed sometimes. I just let the expert go ahead and do their thing, and then we all present our things. And yeah, at some point you have to, as a director, put it all together. You've got to put it all together. But that is one thing I think I would like to have been able to done, is be able to read music a bit better, just for the fun of it, really, and just to be a bit nosy. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I think I agree, because I can read music, and I when I first got a job in a musical, I was like, the fact that I read music is going to put me in such an excellent position, and the musical director is going to think it's so useful that I can read music. And I literally never, ever read music in the room, not once. It never came up. And I was like, oh, well, this is what a useless skill. I may as well have not been able to, for all the good. So I certainly wouldn't worry if you can't, because even if you can, it doesn't come up. Unless you go out of your way to sort of engineer a situation in which you can do it, but there's no point, particularly, as long as you can communicate what you mean about the music. And that could, I guess, if you've got a music background, you might communicate in quite a technical way and be like, let's go from the glissando. But if you don't have that language, just be like, let's go from the yeah bit, and the musical director will still know what you're talking about.
Like, yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah,
exactly. I do that. Let's go from the yeah bit, that bit. That's what I do.
Yeah, because they know what you mean, so it literally doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you guys. And I suppose I suppose I can feel the music. I can't read music. I've never tried, but I understand musicality, and I understand I feel music, and I know narrative in music. All those things as a director, I suppose I know. But as a director, you've got to learn things like, what's a zitz probe? I mean, I didn't know what the hell that was. And everyone kept saying it. I was like, I'm doing my first musical. What's a zitz probe? What's that? What is it? What is it? And I actually had to Google it because I was too embarrassed to ask. So those are there are technical things that you do need to know.
And for anyone who doesn't know, do you want to just enlighten them?
I still don't know what it is. No, I do. It's the moment when you all come together, when the band, the music, and all the kind of acting, dancing, for the beautiful moment when the musical first breathes together. It's the best way I can describe it. And everyone goes, oh my God, this is amazing. And some people cry. Yeah, it's that moment.
I know what everyone means about reading music. Many years ago, I was assistant director on a musical, and the director was so proud he could read music that he made a real point of going, okay, could we go back to bar 23, please? And it became, bless him, it became the company joke. The MD used to take the piss out of him all the time. But it really, yeah, I much prefer, can we go from the yeah moment? Because it's much more expressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I do not read music at all. But like Pravesh, I feel like I feel it, and I see images with it. And like lots of like solo songs and musicals, like I understand that the way that I understand Shakespeare. Like music gives the background, it gives the rhythms, it tells you a journey and paints tapestry and imagery that because we like, well, with Shakespeare, the way people would speak would be completely different. It would be a lot more descriptions and imagery and less spectacle in the way that we would. So that the power is all about the words. And with musicals, the tapestries are created with the music. And I don't think you need to, you do not need to know music theory to direct musicals, but you have to have an appreciation for musical, and you have to know the importance of musical. That's vital. And I don't know anything, but I do sit in the music halls because I like to just know the language. And during this during the lockdown, I've also like went in to direct first film, and like the transition from play, musical, and film is, for me, I think as a director, it's all about learning more language of like, because everything is really similar, but it's just different terms, and learning everyone's department. And knowing that they need to have the time to do their prep and their understanding. But yeah, I don't think that it's vital. I wish I did, but I'm also not learning that, so that's on me.
That's great. I mean, building on that, I'm always fascinated by the really finer details of that collaboration between the director and the music director. In terms of the rehearsal process, like Bronagh, you were just saying, you often sit in on the music calls. I'm interested, have you ever experienced any conflict with the musical director that you're working with in terms of the interpretation of the performance for a song, where say the director is feeling actually what's more true for the character is this, but the musical director is saying, but technically I really want the song to be sung in this way in terms of what's more technically beautiful or more appropriate to the way the song was composed. Have you ever had any conflict, or do you have any tips on a successful collaboration in terms of the way you talk with the MD in terms of the interpretation of some of the songs dramatically?
Yeah, there's conflict all the time, but conflict is great. It lets you understand, you know, like I think everybody's in their ideas and their thoughts, and then you have to go with your instinct. And like, if I really need this to happen, then it is really important. But if everyone else's voice is heard and they're a little bit flexible, then you go, okay, that isn't as strong, so maybe go with this person's instinct. I worked recently with Stephen Schwartz on the new, we did like a new revised, reimagined version of Rags. And, you know, Rags has a very big, famous overture at the beginning. And I thought that that's not how the show should start. I was like, it needs to start with a single violin playing Children of the Wind. And he was like, why would they do that? And I went, because your show is the sequel to Fiddler, and that's your handover of the story. And I think if you're able to communicate your idea in a storytelling way, like that's what everyone will get on board with. Like that's where you go, well, that is the reason we are doing this. We're trying to tell a story. Yeah, I've had many conflicts, but that's good. That's creative. That's making, and I work a lot in new musicals, which I love. And there's constant conflict because there's no answer. It's never been done. So you're really like figuring it out. But I mean, it's all about respect. And I think the key thing is saying always, can we try it? And just create a room where there is chance to explore and express, and create a room that is safe, that people can feel, and that you are not afraid to feel and go, yeah, the idea was actually rubbish. You're totally right. It should be this.
I think it's that thing that you were saying earlier, Bronagh, as well. It's like, I think like the conflict and the collaboration is really useful. And if you're worried about that conflict being a dangerous one, I suppose one of the ways that you can help to avoid that is in what you were saying earlier, Bronagh, about prep, isn't it? It's like, if you can, as much of the prep you can do with your MD there, the better, because I think then you're sat down together and you're looking at the dramaturgy of the thing. And your musical director is going to have their own sense of dramaturgy, even if they don't think they do, because they've been sitting and watching musicals their whole lives. And actually you can, you know, if you can sit with someone and go, what's the story here? What has to happen? What needs to, you know, what are the story beats? What are they? Why are they? And you do that kind of text sort of table work almost that you would do with a script before you go into rehearsals, probably, because you probably won't have time in rehearsals. But if you do have one of those really sexy, luxurious processes of weeks and weeks and weeks, that maybe do it in the room, but whichever way, like actually if you're doing that dramaturgical work with your creative team there, as many of them as possible, as often as possible, then at the very least your goal for what the impact of the song will be the same. And then it's just about which is that, rather than the music says I think this, you'll have already had that chat and it just becomes about how best we achieve our shared goal rather than us going in different directions. I think that can be really helpful thing if you've got the kind of musical that allows you to do that in terms of the way the songs are structured. But doing the dramaturgy and the text work on the songs with the MD I found to be immensely helpful, because they have all sorts of clever little clues about the music that you miss. So yeah, that might be one way to smooth that. But as Bronagh says, conflict is not inherently bad. So
yeah, absolutely. And like the choreographer and the musical director, they're storytellers too, and it's like making sure that like they are, like we are as people, we are as theatre makers, we tell stories, and it's not like the director isn't the person that owns that bit. It is all like collaboration. Yes, luxurious prep is, yeah, I would love those days of 6 weeks in a musical. Yeah, to be getting that one day.
I saw Pravesh's hand up at one point. Did you?
Yeah, I was just going to add, because I make culturally specific musicals, I constantly find myself saying to my MD, oh, they're singing like a musical. I don't want them to sing like that. Can you hit the, I know the word now, vibrato. Can we lose that? I didn't know what that was for years. And I was like, no, I want them to sing. Can they just sing the song like, you know, like a pop song? And they would like look at me like, how dare you? But yes, I constantly find myself saying, and make musicals, but not those musicals, because it's such a big term, isn't it, musical theatre? We make there's so many different types of musicals, and so much, and you know, so I often, you know, especially with a show like Britain's Got Bhangra, there's a certain style of singing Bhangra music, and I love my actors when they first came in. They came in and they were singing it like it was, you know, a West End musical with lots of vibrato, and I was like, okay, I'm going to play some Bhangra songs now, guys, and they got it straight away. So yeah, it's just you know, constant learning from each other.
Omar, anything?
Just quickly, I completely agree with all of you, completely. But I have often, and as a director of musicals, I've actually, and no offense to any kind of musical directors out there, please, but I've actually called a lot of them out for not reading the script. And this is a really huge thing. If I can study the music, and I can't even read music, but I can listen to it over and over again, which means I'm completely open to suggestions. I've listened to it, I've immersed myself in it. So if you work with an MD sometimes and there's that conflict, which I don't think there should be a conflict, there should be difference of opinions and get those mashed out. But if your MD, if any MD is literally, I'm not doing that, this is what it's got to be, that shouldn't be. That means they've not really read the script. If they've read the script several times, even if there's no luxury of a 1 week meeting beforehand, which is always great, but we're not all Cameron Macintosh, you know, or whatever. That means they've not studied that script. They don't know, that means they don't know the story properly. They've read it, so they're not asked you any questions. MD to me should always come back with questions about what do you feel about the take of this song? What do you feel of how it should be presented? How should we go about this song or that song? So when the person is singing it, and I agree with Bronagh, am I getting this word wrong? Is it Bronagh or Bronagh? Sorry.
It's Bronagh. Thank you for asking.
Bronagh, sorry.
No, not at all.
I really believe that the MDs should work, I'm sure they do, most of them, just as hard as the directors and the choreographers do at reading that script with you, even by themselves, so that when you start speaking, you're all on the same book, literally. But I've been stuck in that room sometime, realizing that the MD has got the music down pat, but then it's stayed like that. You have to almost fight a battle, and it shouldn't be a battle. And I think in the end, let's be honest with you, a director has to get all these pieces in the end and make this really beautiful jigsaw. They've got to do it, taking everybody's ideas in and creating a jigsaw. So all it takes, I think, an MD to do and a director is to listen to each other. But you can't listen if you're not on the same book. That's just one. This is the real nitty gritty. And it's also good to make sure you're working with a director that ask them, have you read the script? I just say, have you read the script? If they say no, I say, oh, read the script and come back. It's a lot easier. And then I smile like this. That's it.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because again, it all comes back to collaboration and your collaborators, and that sort of having the right MD who gets the cultural references of the music, having an MD who's a storyteller. And we haven't even got on to choreographers yet. I'm not gonna go there because there's so many questions coming in from the people watching. I think I should go to those, but maybe someone will ask something about a choreographer. And that's such a huge bit of the collaboration. But the first question we've got coming in is a very different, takes us off in a different area, which is how do you guys balance the work you're doing with the effort to on your current productions with the developing new work? So how do you work on current productions and develop future projects at the same time?
With great difficulty, I think.
Next question.
I'm kind of lucky in a way because I have a company and a set of people that we're paid all year round. We're lucky to be funded by the Arts Council. So in a way, we can plan it. We plan our development phase and our production phases. And when if we're going to a big musical, then, you know, we know we're not doing anything but that for at least most of that year. So lots of planning. Yeah, especially like during COVID year, we've done loads of planning. We've had, in a way, silver lining has been lots of planning and development on musicals.
I think sometimes it's also about being really realistic with how much time you personally need in order to do all those things. And like, so for me, I think as you can probably tell, like I really like prep, and I really like doing prep with other members of the creative team. And I'm quite bad at doing it on my own, apart from anything else, because I've got a really short attention span and I'm really bad at self-discipline. So if I'm stuck by myself, I will probably like do a little bit of work and then like accidentally fall down a sort of like Twitter hole for 2 hours and then not. So one thing that I do that helps me is to sort of like look at my diary and go, right, I'm going to be in rehearsals from this day to this day, but there's something else that needs to get prepped beforehand or after then, if I'm lucky enough to have two things coming up or whatever. And then this has helped me because I'm really disorganized as well, as just to be like, right, I always make sure that if I'm putting a team together, it's people who also like working like that. And I'll put dates in, and I'll just do all my prep with as much of my prep as possible with someone else, or set myself, I'll meet up with a designer for the morning, and then we'll set ourselves homework, and I'll give myself a deadline so that I've done it by the time we get back together. And that helps a little bit, because I suppose what you need to realistically do is know, what do I realistically need to have done so that I can get into rehearsals and really minimize what other stuff I can be thinking about then, because I think all of us would rather not be thinking about anything else when we're in rehearsals if we can help it at all. So as much as we can minimize stuff to do then, the better, but that means being quite disciplined and quite clever with organizing your time before that. And also like other things, like when you are going to do your laundry, and when you are going to see your family, and when you are going to work your job that makes you actual money, and whatever else it is. But I think it's about really protecting and designating time to do that work, so that it's just not a kind of thing hanging over your head that you don't get around to. That certainly helps me. But as I said earlier, the real answer is it's really hard, and no one's really cracked it, I suspect. But I'd love to hear other people's tips, because I'm always trying to work it out.
Any other responses to that, or should we move on? No, let's move on. We've got another question here asking about the differing lengths of rehearsals for a musical, from Steve, saying, you know, a 2-week rehearsal process versus a 3 or a 4-week rehearsal process, or a 6-week rehearsal process, if they ever exist. What are your approaches to differing lengths of rehearsals? How involved do you get in scheduling the balance of music calls versus choreography calls, and working on in the rehearsal room on the book? What are there massive differences in the balance of the rehearsals on the music versus the scene rehearsals, and differing lengths of rehearsal process?
I think for me, I don't know about a 6-week one. That's amazing. That's fantastic. Anyway, but you have to make sure that your cast is really diligent. If your cast is not diligent, i.e. meaning that they've not looked at the script, they've not done their homework, they've not studied the songs, you're going to be constantly behind. But on the other hand as well, let's say it's the 3 weeks, you've got to make sure that you send that cast every single piece of ammo that they need. Once you've sent that ammo to them and they know they've got it, they've got to try and get much of that stuff down as much as possible before stepping into the room. And you're going to have to set, let's say it's for 3 weeks, you're going to have to set really scary deadlines. But when you set those deadlines, you can make it in the room, I'm telling you, absolute fun. You can make that stress into absolute fun. By the end of week 1, you're kind of stacking it, really running it through, and everyone's laughing because it looks like a pile of mess, and no one knows who's playing Snoopy, and no one knows who's going to be doing Kinky Boots. We don't know, but it's going to be fantastic. And it's all fun. And then you as a director, you go home and then you stress about it yourself. You don't bring the stress into the cast. Don't bring that stress into the room. Then the following week, you do the same thing for Act 2, and then you start running it. You've got to get to that point of running it at least once a day, or at least 1 act a day as soon as possible. No matter how messy it is, but no matter how stressed you are as a director, you do not bring that into the room. And that's my main tip. However short your rehearsal period is, you've got to push that cast, make it fun, but you do not bring your stress into the room, and you do not bring your anger or whatever it is onto individual cast member for not knowing something. And that's just one thing I'm very much against, because it becomes like, well, I'm going to pass on my kind of negative feeling onto this person, and it's not their fault. So what I'm going to say is, when it's a short rehearsal period, know it's short, tell them it's short, say it's going to be stressful, make a joke of it, laugh, have fun. You'll get it done, but do not bring your stress into the room as a director. It's not needed, nobody wants it, and it won't help the show at all.
Anyone else on rehearsal planning and the different lengths of rehearsals?
I always work backwards with it, and similar to what Omar was saying, I put like tight deadlines. So if it's 2 weeks, I did Broken Wings at the Haymarket for a week. We had 2 weeks rehearsal, and I was like, I'm not doing the show unless the actors have 2 solid runs in. Like, that has to be. And the show is created based on what the parameters that I've been given, and like that's literally my job. It's like, these are the resources, these are the parameters, you've got to make it happen. And a lot of directing is about management, and time management particularly, and so setting like tight goals. This is probably not what everyone will agree with, but for me, particularly short process, I like to work chronologically, so I make sure I haven't missed anything. And when it's a new piece particularly, for the actors, I think it puts them in a better stead to understand the arc of the piece and what you're trying to create. Obviously, if you have like maybe big dance numbers, you want to get them set down earlier. So sometimes that isn't always as helpful. But maybe if it is that case, then allocate certain parts of the day that are for the choreography to happen. And then when you're putting together scenes, do it chronologically so that everyone is all in the same page, and know that like a room is, there are many minds in the room, and you can ask actors like their opinion, their thought, and their feeling, and you can sift that out of what is helpful for everyone or yourself at that point. But setting tight deadlines, and the show will be made in 2 weeks, the show will be made in 6 weeks. Like, that's just the job. And the reason I do 2 runs is because one is like to make sure it even if there's sticky plasters, like, it can function. And then I've got my checklist of things that I need to sort. And then the final one, at least, I like doing more than 2 runs, but if you're looking at a 2-week process, you'll probably not get much more than that. The last one is for the company to know that they have got something that is locked before we go into tech, and then reach all those other challenges. So yeah, my tips would be chronologically, and get some tight deadlines, and get at least 2 runs in so everyone feels safe.
Can I just say, because this is coming up quite a lot in a sort of moving through COVID way, it's coming up a lot at SDUK about what's manageable and what's not. And I think if you had some money and a plot of land, and you went to an architect and said, build me a house, and you said you had £20,000, the architect would come back and show you what a £20,000 house looks like. And if you said you had £200,000, the architect would come back and say what £200,000 house looked like, and you would work out your parameters based on that. And I think it is entirely acceptable for us as theatre directors, if we're not the producers, when a producer goes, I want you to direct this play in 2 weeks, to not in a negative way, but to go, that's great, okay, this is what a 2-week production looks like, this is what a 6-week production looks like, this was a 4-week production looks like in terms of rehearsals. There's an element where we think that where we maybe sometimes have pretended that our job is mystical, and that we can do anything that's asked, and we can pull a rabbit out of a hat, and that we can make a production that looks like a big Cameron show in 2 weeks. And we know we can't. Now, that doesn't mean that the production we can make in 2 weeks is bad, but if we're realistic about what we can achieve, and we're honest with the producers at that point, and the producers have the opportunity to go, actually, I want something different. So I'm going to rethink my budget, my schedule, or, okay, no, that's great. That's the production I want. And that's why I gave you 2 weeks. So it is okay with managers to talk about what the parameters that they set, what that production will look like at the end of that, and not feel scared of that initial conversation about what they're buying, if you like, with their budget. We don't have to pretend we're going to give a show that we can't give. I think is really important. I think, unless anyone has anything more to say on that, I will move us on. I keep getting the development questions on the list. The next one is, what are the most important elements when you're starting to develop a musical from scratch? Yes, yeah.
Well, because I do this a lot, and I think it's the idea. Is it a musical? So many times I've sat on panels and seen new musicals arrive, and so many times you're like, that's a really good idea, but it's a play. It's not, or a play with music. Is it a musical? Does it need music at the core to tell its story? I think that's really important, because we have so many great ideas, but they're not all musicals.
Omar, go for it.
I agree with Pravesh that it is. I've been sent so many things and ideas, not things. Sorry, it's really rude. Some have been things, but mostly ideas of people have of musicals, and you have to look at it carefully. And something inside you will say, "This is definitely." It's just that it's an instinct. This is definitely a musical. But then something inside you might also say, "Why?" The question is why. Half the time, it's like, why is this a musical? Why do you want it to be a musical? Who is going to watch it as a musical? And who would produce it? And what's the interest? Even Stephen Sondheim himself is a really good composer for his time and stuff. But some of his stuff has literally flopped, and people are saying, I don't know why it flopped. It's Stephen Sondheim. You say, well, it's dull. I don't want to watch a musical about, people at war and they're starving or something. And you have to admit it's not a musical. So it's an instinctive thing. And because a lot of musicals have been written through vanity. And they're put on through vanity. Because the person who's written the musical has got lots of money behind them and says, oh, put this on. And you can do more damage to yourself directing those kind of musicals than what you think. So I would say it's instinct. If your heart says this is a good musical, talk to some friends about it first as well. But if instinctively you think it's not, it's not.
And it's a big investment, musical theatre, a big investment, because it's not just, I'm not saying that plays are not a big investment, they are too, but here you've got song and lyric and music and dialogue. It's such a huge investment to make, and then go, oh, I'm not sure, but in all these songs, it's actually not a great idea. It doesn't actually, so I think if you're gonna, before you build the house, just check the concrete's there, I think.
Right. I should now steal that.
Anything else on that one? If not, our next question is about communication again. So important as we're going back to the theme of collaboration. Someone asking in terms of if there's suggestions made by other heads of department or the writers when you're working on a new musical and the writers are sometimes in the room, if there are suggestions that you're getting as the director that you feel aren't serving the story or they're not suiting your preferences for the way the way you want a scene to play out, what are your tips on how to handle those suggestions that are not fitting with your vision for the overall musical? How do you handle those conversations where one of the other, whether the MD or the choreographer or the writer wants to take a scene in a different direction from your interpretation? Omar.
I'm going to be honest with you. I just use 3 words, and you just got to say, hold that thought. That's what I say. That's the truth. Hold that thought.
It's a really good one.
I think if it's like a really direct conflict, ultimately your job is like you're the director, like you're and like, I don't know, I heard the job once described as like your job is to be like the decider. And so I suppose ultimately like the decision will stop with you unless there is a sort of like, there's some reason why whoever is you're dealing with is sort of who officially wields more power than you, maybe like a producer, but actually for the most part the buck does stop with you. And it's always really great if that can come out of a really kind of wonderful conversation. And it's always really great if you can reach a compromise, or if you can be re-inspired, or if you can have your mind changed. But ultimately, if none of those things are the case, then I suppose you are faced with a question for yourself, which is, which one do I care about more, that the MD is a bit pissed off with me or that I get the thing I want in the show? And then you go from there. Now, if you're a half decent person, you'll probably be able to do that in a way that means the MD, if they are pissed off at you, will just have to lick their wounds for a bit, and then you'll get over it and say, well, because they're professionals and you're a nice person and you're not going to be a dickhead about it. So don't be a dickhead about it. But if it is to pick what happens. So you'll have to do that.
But I think I agree with you. So that's where, when I say to people that if your team doesn't have that ego involved and realize that the star of the show is going to be the show, I do honestly do say hold that thought, because it means that you're not contributing. If it's clashing so much, you're not contributing to the show. Sometimes they're contributing to what they think it should be, which is not quite the same thing. That's where the egos get involved. And I think as a director, you should always listen to the things that you think are going to advance what you want to do with the show and what they can contribute. But if they literally are trying to change the way a scene is going or the way something is going, away from your, let's be honest, you've got to have your own kind of, what's it called, imagination that's behind the whole thing. If they're trying to literally change that in a scene due to how they want it to be sang or danced, which doesn't actually, but it conflicts with how the scene's going to be, then sometimes I always say with a nice smile, hold that thought. Because you will get into a really big conflict, which will go on and on and on. You've got 2 ways to do it. Either you have to stand your ground and think, well, I think I've done enough as I possibly can. Or sometimes you will get that kind of confrontation is done in front of a whole cast. That is a big thing that happens, let's be honest with you, where people will challenge you on your team in front of a whole cast. And that's a great way. You've got to say, let's just hold that thought. And then you can go away and discuss that at another time. That's a very big thing in musical theatre. I've noticed that when somebody in the team is not getting their way, not because of the way that is good for the show, just not getting their way, they sometimes do confront in front of a whole team. It's very rare, but it does happen. It does happen. So I always say, hold that thought, and then we'll come back to it. I'm not saying that I do come back to it, but that's what happens. That's what I do.
Sounds like an ideal rehearsal gift, a mug or a t-shirt with hold that thought. What a useful phrase to keep in mind. Anything further from Bronagh or Pravesh? Further thoughts on that?
I suppose when you're working on new musicals, it's it's all new, and the writers, obviously it's their baby and they really care about it. And a big question I would always ask is, if there's a moment that I'm unsure about, is does it drive narrative? And I'd ask them, what is it you want the audience to think and feel? Because then I see what you're saying, but I need to know how I can make the audience feel the thing that you want. And I don't think that might is necessarily the way, because of the way that the writer sees it. So thinking about the audience and posing the question of, does it drive narrative? But often with new musicals, it is about developing and reshaping. So you have that license. That's harder when you're working with writers that are reinventing something they've just done, or there has been past production, things like that. I do like working with writers in the room. I think you just need to set your parameters on that too. Like, I think make sure they feel they have a voice, but they don't need to be in every day. That's not helpful for the actors. It's not helpful for you. But checking in with them is good. But definitely set up your, and some people aren't comfortable with the writers, and that's fine too. But making sure you have established before you get into the first day of rehearsals when you want them in the room, and what, like, I don't think they should necessarily be talking to the actors unless it's through you. So making sure you've set like those boundaries early on is really important too. That was kind of off tangent, sorry, that just mentioned the writers, kind of followed on from there.
No, that's such an important point to make. Really, really relevant. Thank you. Pravesh.
Actually, I agree about the writer thing. I think you've got to be very careful, because actors do flock to writers to ask about, you know, oh, when you were writing this, how did it feel? And what did this character really mean to you? And you're like, talk to me. Yeah, I make it very clear with the writer how they're normally in for the first few days, and then, you know, they're coming weekly, or yeah, setting those parameters, and also setting those parameters with your team as well, with your actors, and say, look, you know, I'm here, I'm going to lead this and support you through this, so talk to me. Yeah, absolutely, that's really important. I suppose when you're working with your creative team and they've offered something and you're not sure about it, I suppose I always say, well, can we try it another way? Let's try it like this and see which one we like. You know, like we've all said, it's collaborative, and, you know, we've all got to fall on our bums a little bit. That's what rehearsal is all about. And yeah, so I just say, let's try another way. And then you pick the best one, because sometimes you're wrong, right? So.
There's a writer I work with, not musical theatre, but he always says any note he gets, nothing's irreversible, so you might as well give it a go. And I try and hold that as a director, actually, when someone, and there's always a time thing in a rehearsal room if someone's going, let's try this, and you're thinking it's wrong. But if you have the time going, oh, actually, maybe I'm wrong, let's try it, and hope that if it's sounding like a terrible idea to you, when they try it, they'll also see that it's a terrible idea. But yeah, that sometimes just sort of going, actually, maybe I'm wrong, let's give it a go. And then we'll all see that I'm not wrong. It can work. The next question that's coming in is, do you have a tendency to work with the same creative team all the time? And I'm just going to add another little bit to that. How do you choose your creative teams? What are you looking for in choreographers, MDs, designers, etc., when you're putting together a team? Who wants to kick us off with that one?
I will start. I'll say, look, it depends on the project. I like to work with new teams, and I like to experiment and find new voices. And sometimes people you've worked with before aren't right for the next job, or sometimes you're not right for it, you know, so we have different directors come in. But I do tend to, when I'm on really big projects, work with people that I have a shorthand with, because you've got to have chemistry. The creative team have to have chemistry. And on, you know, when you've got these big projects, and musicals are sometimes massive, you can't spend 3 weeks finding each other. So I tend to, on bigger projects, work with people that I do know, not the whole team, but normally my production designer and my choreographer, I will have worked with before on a big show.
Yeah,
kind of going, oh, sorry. Going back to an earlier question, actually. So when you're, sorry, it does link. When you're talking about trying to balance the work that you're doing and the new work that is in development, having, so if I feel like I'm double jobbing, I like to have creatives that I have a shorthand with, that I know that can keep the room afloat, and like I know how that choreographer works, so I can, like, I know they're going to be great, and I know that they've got that time, and then I can balance that project. So it's good to have creatives that you know, so that they can keep things probably when you've got to do a meeting for the next thing or the rest of it. But equally, I love working with new creatives. On this particular show, I've only worked with one of the designers. It's a new lighting, sound, costume composer, writer, and it's been it's been challenging, but we had some really interesting ideas, new ways of working. So I think it's good to keep a pulse on other creatives that are around and available, and you grow as an artist too, working with new people. But it's handy to work with people you know when you are multi-jobbing, at least in one of them, so that the other one can tick along. Yeah.
Further thoughts? Do I see maybe something from Tinuke? No, maybe no.
No, I was sort of, yeah, kind of, but not really. Like a tiny thing, I suppose, which was just about the like just being really honest with yourself about why you're working with new people. Because like the example Bronagh gives is a really good reason to work with people that you know, which is you're going to be back to back and you're not going to have much time to go back and forth. Or like, I don't know, I think sometimes if I ever have two jobs quite close together, I quite like, if I can and it works for the show, I quite like to use the same designer, because then our design meetings can be about both things at once and we're not having to jump around, for example. But I also think it's about making sure that you're not just using people you know because they make you feel safe and cozy and like you know what you're doing, because sometimes that's not helpful, although sometimes it is. Like, for example, if you feel a bit out of your depth, maybe you want to get people you know and or people who are a bit more experienced than you. So on The Colour Purple, everyone had done loads of musicals, like, because I was like, I'm not doing a show with, like, we can't all not know what we're doing. Do you know what I mean? So like that's one thing. But also there's other things to think about, like if you're doing something culturally specific, is there a way of getting people in the room who are going to represent those communities, especially if you're not representative of that community? That might be a thing to think about. Or is there a particular choreography that if you have your usual go-to choreographer is great, but actually this is going to require a skill that you know they don't have as much as somebody else, maybe that's another time to take a risk. Or I suppose the other version, which I don't think I'm quite at yet, but I hope to be one day, is like if you suddenly find yourself in a position where you're really experienced and you've done loads and loads of shows and you really know what you're doing, or for whatever reason the thing feels really manageable, then that's also an opportunity to take risks and maybe work with a less experienced choreographer or a less experienced MD and bring people up in a way that would have been a bit irresponsible earlier on, but you can do now. So I suppose it's just about working out. But also, like, I suppose the flip side of that, and it's the thing we all have to grapple with, I suppose, is it's really nice working with your mates, isn't it? So it's just about kind of forming a balance that's like really respectful to the work and also to the kind of ecology of our industry, and all that, balancing all that stuff at once, I think is probably important. That's all.
And there's a question that's just come in that very much segues on this, which is about, particularly if you're an emerging director, how do you find your team in terms of seeking new collaborators on a new musical in particular, or any musical production? Where do you look to find your collaborators, particularly if it's a sort of small scale, perhaps low budget fringe musical? What would be your top tips for finding ideal collaborators for that kind of small scale musical production? Omar.
When I first started out with my own company, Okai Purlie, I didn't know anybody. Well, I direct and choreograph anyway, but I didn't know anybody else who I could sort of work with. So the best thing to do is to go and see other people's work, especially on the, there's some amazing directors off West End and on the Fringe, or some people who literally choreograph or direct for the performing arts schools a lot. They're absolutely, I do it sometimes myself, and they're literally absolutely fantastic people. And you can find people who are correct for that ethnicity you need, or all sorts of stuff. But that is the best place to find people if you're merging, and maybe they're emerging too. But if you contact performing arts schools, they will have a list and lists of the most amazing directors, amazing choreographers who have not made it whatever there is. I don't know what that there means, but made it there yet. And some of the smaller shows on the Fringe or off West End have fantastic, doesn't mean because they're in a smaller West End show or they're working in a, say, like, whatever, Trinity or Erdang or Arts Educational, that they're not good. They're usually great. And they're just waiting for that chance, someone to say, look, do you want to come and work with me? And also, don't be scared. Do not be scared to approach people who are really established. So a lot of people are really established. If they like what they're seeing and what they hear, and they think you're correct, they will come along and work with you. And usually what you'll find is, if someone's really experienced, as Tinuke said, way more than you, they will literally nurture you. I do that for people. I work with people, and don't think I've got no money. It's not always about money. It's not always about money, because that one project you do together could be the project. Happened many a time. That could be the project. You might say, okay, I can give you 3 days of my time a week or something. But that's how you can find those creators. They are there. Don't be scared to ask. Everyone's emerging. I'm always called emerging. I'm not emerging anymore, but I'm called emerging for some really weird, stupid reason.
Oh, Pravesh.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I mean, I'm doing this right now. I'm talking to a lot of agents at the moment for a project that I'm doing, and I'm finding it quite difficult because I don't normally talk to agents. You know, and agents can be quite difficult to go to because they're looking at a very different thing. They're looking at what the production company is and what they're going to get out of it. So yeah, that is one route, but there are lots of link boards that you can go to. There are groups, and I find social media is really good for this. There are lots of groups on social media, you know, performance groups, artist groups that you can join, who have lots of people, like-minded people, that you can start to network with. During lockdown, there have been quite a few Zoom networking events, and I think they're going to carry on doing them. So join some of them, and I hate this word emerging because, well, I'm emerging till I'm submerging apparently, but you know, it's true, Omar, it's true. I suppose, you know, yeah, there are lots of networks online right now that I've suddenly joined. So yeah, join those.
Anything else on that? No. Hand over. Thomas, have you got?
I was just going to quickly say, this is obviously not if you're looking for collaborators, but if you've got something up and running, whether you're, you know, if you're acting as the producer on it, if you're producing, directing, or if you're working with a producer, don't be afraid to advertise. You don't always need to go back to the same people, and there are plenty of places you can advertise for creative teams. The obvious one is the arts councils, arts jobs. People put adverts out on. And there's a couple of directors who've recently created something called Open Hire because they want to make hiring of creative teams open and more transparent. And you can just, I think if you go to Open Hire's website, you can just contact them with a brief rundown of what it is that you're looking for. You know, I need a lighting designer for this play and the fee is this amount of money. These are the dates, and they will put it out and it will go out to their networks. So yeah, don't feel you always have to go to people you know. You know, do look around and do advertise. There's no reason just because we're freelance we shouldn't advertise our jobs. The next thing that's come up is, do you have any tips on getting a new musical off the ground if the team is unknown? What should you do to gain some traction?
I make lots of new musicals with unknown people, including myself. I'm, you know, was quite unknown at one time. I suppose it's about finding the right partner. What I did very early in my career is I would align myself with a like-minded building partner or a producer. And that's really hard to find as well. But, you know, for example, musicals that I wanted to make were talking to a certain audience. So I found the buildings that had those audiences and started developing relationships. Like, for example, I had a great relationship with Theatre Royal Stratford East for many years, where a lot of my early work was not, well, that's where I got really my big opportunities from. And I suppose if you can find those spaces and make those relationships and write to people and never take no for an answer. I still never take no for an answer. You know, if they ignore you, just keep writing to them, because one day they will actually reply. You know, yeah.
Do you think, I was just thinking back in the 70s and 80s, I believe, I wasn't around then, back in the 70s or 80s, there was the musicals often got off the ground with a concept album, that gained traction and then went into the West End. Is there a version of that now in a world of YouTube and Spotify where the music leads, and when that gets traction, then a live performance of some sort happens? Does it, I guess Six sort of maybe had an element of that.
I think that's true. I think lots of young composers, and also they compose in a different way. Let's start with composers. They compose in a different way. They don't necessarily write the music. They compose electronically, they write differently, and then they get somebody to write the music down if it's needed, the dots. But I do feel that with, I'm not going to say, I suppose, Twitter, all those other TikTok-y type things, it sounds weird, but a lot of people I know have actually released a song from their musical. And it's happened several times actually that I know of, where they have then been given a chance to, to workshop it or to work on it, and it's gone from there. I think Six is kind of like one of those kind of things, yeah. But that's the other way to do it, because in the 70s, and I was born 1965, so I don't remember, in the 80s with definite, I can remember, that it was all a bit closed shop. It was all like, I've got a new musical, and I know so-and-so, and I went to them discreetly, and then we did a massive workshop, which nobody heard about, and then it's in the West End, and then this is the best musical in the world. Whereas now you've got some really amazing composers, and I think young people now are bringing out the most amazing things of all diversities, telling their stories, and you may want to silence them, but you can't, because the way they get out on Twitter, hats off, the way I think young composers and creators get their stuff out on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram is fantastic. And I think that's the way it's gotten out now. But I think what they really need now is a place to inject the money and encourage. I mean, I'm on the board of Mercury Musicals, and that's something I'm on that board for, is to try and help, first of all, just change the look of the whole thing and how they approach musicals, which they know anyway. And I work with them very, very well. And I'm loving it. I've got some ideas I want to show them as well. But I think I think with Mercury Musicals, they're making, I think, a big opening towards that. How to approach new musical writers, and the differences. And the difference is it's a cultural thing as well. It's a cultural thing, how musicals are approached. Yeah, definite. The young composers, they got it going on, I'm telling you that much.
I totally agree with you, Omar. It's new media. It's online. It's your phones. People can make their own music at home now. It's very different, and you can make these. In the olden days, you'd record something on a tape or and send that out, and no one would listen to it. But now, very quickly, you can make something on your phone, and it can be visual. It can be and you can send that out to people. And actually, people are more likely to listen to that than they are to read a big fat script. So I totally agree.
It's instant. Because when you think about, if you send as a composer, so not young composer, but let's be honest, they're so on it, you can send your stuff off to these big musical theatre directors corporations, and there's somebody that will stop you even getting your stuff heard if they don't like it. If they don't like it particularly, they won't let anybody else hear it. But when you get out there on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, most likely somebody above you is going to hear it above that person. And that's the beauty of it. It is hard, but I like it. And I just think they need to keep doing that all the time. If you're listening out there, keep doing it. Bombard but protect your music. Protect your music.
Absolutely. And we've got a question here about what kind of, when we're looking at the kind of new musicals that you might receive as directors to work on from people putting all this content out there, if you're seeing content on some of the social media and so on, what's the sort of new musicals that you as directors are interested in directing? Someone is asking from listening in. What makes you go, oh, I'd really love to direct that particular new musical? And are you tending to find content from what's posted on social media, or where else do you discover new musicals that you might want to work on? How do they make their way to you? Rona, do I see thoughts there?
I work quite a lot with producer Katie Lipton of Ari Entertainment, so I'm part of her literary department. So would receive a lot of new musicals through that. Not so much on social media, but that's just because I'm not very good at social media. I'm just like an old nana. So, but I know that is that is the way to be doing it. So that is not good. You should definitely I think that is the way forward. Like certainly during the pandemic, like we are just inundated with music all the time. It's also why I think you don't need to necessarily have directed musical theatre before to be sensitive at understanding how to direct with music, because even the last 15 years, just music that surrounds us all the time, just soundscapes all the time, just the way the media, TikTok, all of that. I part of the literary department, so that's where I would get quite a lot of stuff. And I've done a lot of workshops and then developed relationship with writers on different materials. For new writing, I personally really want to love the story. Like it's because it's a lot of work. It's very rare to get it off to that start. So I think when you're going to direct new writing, even a workshop, you've got to really care about the story, because it's a lot more effort than what the likelihood of the immediate success of it would be, or success being measured by, like, I don't know, review or a full-fledged production. So I think you've got to be really passionate about the story that you want to tell, and in that way you actually are giving more care to the art, because you're making sure that you're the right person to help develop this writer's work. But I for all of this, whether you want to be or you want to be good at musical theatre directing, see stuff. You want to know new writers, go to new writing festivals. And now, because of the pandemic, like a lot of things have changed, and some I think will stay, and I hope for the good, with the idea that having so much stuff streamed is making art more accessible to people and more affordable, and being able to reach it from different areas of the country. So there's a lot of access now to be seeing new work and musicals, and that's how I think I've learned is by absorbing, being a sponge, going to see stuff that you don't like, see stuff that you think is not for you, just so you have a better understanding of the genre, and hear the voices of new writers out there.
Absolutely. Any further on that? Obviously, a shameless plug there. Do think about coming to Beam, because for Beam, MMD and MTN do it every 2 years, and it's a journey all around the UK, listening last time around 320 ideas for new musicals, and then selecting a really representative and diverse range of, I think this time around it's going to be 37 new musicals. So it's a great way to introduce yourself to lots of new musicals bubbling through their development processes that are seeking development and production opportunities. So it's another great way to see what's coming through and you might want to work on. Any further thoughts there, or handing back over to Thomas? We're almost at wrap-up time, I think.
Well, then maybe this is a good question to end on, I guess, which is, what advice would you have for directors who are looking to get into musicals, particularly if you're not in that musical theatre circle? And I know a couple of you said that that you didn't necessarily, you've directed as much straight theatre as you have musical theatre. The question says, it feels like musical theatre and other genres are completely separate tribes. So how have you bridged that tribe between other genres and musical theatre?
I think for me, I think one thing that I did was, and it sounds really silly, but it's sort of true, which is I just sort of told people I wanted to direct musicals all the time, like kind of any opportunity I had. If I was like having a meeting with someone, or if I had a meeting, if I was lucky enough to have a meeting with an artistic director, or if I was being interviewed, which doesn't happen very often, but when it does, I just sort of made a point, because I was always a musical theatre fan. I always knew that was a thing that I would love to be involved in, and I mean that I did this over the course of like 10 years. I don't mean like I once said I said I wanted to do a musical and then musicals just turned up. I think there's no reason, if you're working in sort of like strict theatre or whatever they call it, there's no reason for people to assume that you want to direct musicals unless you make a big noise about it. So I think that was partly I just went on about it, and so by the time Curve had a show where they needed a director for, it had already kind of been on their radar that I'd been yelling about how I wanted to do a musical, which I know sounds very silly and not very practical, but I do think it's how I ended up doing them. And I think they do still feel like quite different worlds. Like when I'm casting musicals or working with musical theatre actors, you look at the sheet and you're like, I literally don't know who any of these people are. Whereas in theatre, you sort of tend to feel like you know who people are. So it does feel like quite different tribes. But I think, the only advice I would give is just like, if you want to do that, tell people, because there's no reason for them to assume. So yeah.
Can I just ask then, did you you didn't pitch Colour Purple to Curve? Curve, we're going to do a pitch and we're looking for a Colour Purple, and we're looking
but I did invite Curve to see a show I was doing, because I knew they did loads of musicals and I wanted to do a musical. So I invited them to see a show that I was doing at Chichester, and was like, I'd love to direct musicals. Not that the show I was doing at Chichester was really representative of the kind of musicals I would go on to do, but I just wanted to know who I was, because I figured they were a good theatre to know about me. If they liked my work, then maybe they'd ask me to come and do something, and then luckily they did. So yeah,
that's also really key, that you don't have to do a musical to invite people and say I want to do musicals. Doing another piece of theatre and saying it works. Sorry, Omar, you were trying to get in and I interrupted.
It's a very quick thing, because I know your time's going. To me, it's just you have to love musicals. That's what I'm going to say. That's the down thing. You just have to love musicals. If you don't love musicals, I wouldn't recommend doing it. But if you really love musicals in your heart, whether you direct straight plays or film, whatever you do, and you love musicals, then go do it. Direct one. And it is hard to get into directing them, but doesn't, as I said before, go and ask a school, performing arts school, anything. Go and ask a small theatre. Send your CV to people. I've done it before, and anything you've done, little bits of film, put it on there and send it to them. And you'll find most people will respond to you. They will respond to you if you love musicals.
It's a really key point, because it sounds so silly. If you want to do a musical, love musicals. I can think of so many big commercial projects on Broadway and in the West End, like where you look at where they've gone horribly wrong, and you look at the creative team and go, there's not a single person on there who actually likes musical theatre. They've got a couple of really cool musicians who don't like musicals to do the music. They've got a really cool kind of artsy director who doesn't really like musicals. They've got a book writer who's just done a movie, he doesn't like musicals. And you go, you probably needed one person who really likes musicals in there to make it work.
You have somebody who makes great costumes for film and doesn't like musicals.
Any final thoughts? It's wrap up time pretty much. The final minute, final thoughts. Anyone not said something that really wanted to say something we haven't touched upon before we wrap up? No, I think we're all happy. We're all zoomed out. I think 90 minutes is about as far as these conversations go. We've covered lots and lots of ground. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Stage Directors UK for co-hosting, to our wonderful panel of Bronagh and Pravesh and Tinuke and Omar. Fantastic insights into your experiences and hopefully also your future ambitions with directing musicals. And we look forward to seeing you all and all of you at Beam, hopefully at Hackney Empire or online on the 10th of September and afterwards. And do join us for the next event with Stage Directors UK or with MTN or with MMD for that matter as well. Thank you so much to our panel for your time and your busy schedules, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much.